The square wakes without rushing. Brooms whisper dust into little amber clouds. A baker wedges his door with a smooth stone, and a ribbon of warm air slips out. Yeast, honeyed crust, a hint of ash. Two curule chairs sit under pale canvas, curved backs catching first light. They are handsome on purpose and a little unforgiving by design, because the men who sit in them, the consuls, are meant to remember that public power is a posture, not a cushion. At the edge, the lictors unbind and rebundle their rods, the old, careful choreography of a city that swore never to wear a crown again, and then taught itself how to look official without becoming one person's property. Farther back, two figures in plain cloaks take up their usual stations, not on the dais, but among the stools and baskets and crates. Tribunes of the plebs, their faces belong to the neighborhood. One with the faded scar that says he used to carry timber, the other with a notary's hands and the habit of listening hard. Their authority, and this is important, does not live in carved stone or dazzling robes. It lives in a vow, born the night the working people went out together to a ridge with scrub and cold stars, and slept there to prove a point. If the hands that lift Rome simply stop for a while, the city becomes a noise of wind and dogs. From that silence came a promise. No Roman should be punished without a public breath between anger and harm, and when a tribune raises his palm, rods pause. It is a small trick that saved a large republic. If you look beyond the market to the slow brown band that edges it, you will see the water that sets Rome's tempo. Say its name plainly, because we are using it often, and we don't want anyone to mistake the poetry for vagueness. The river Tiber. It is Rome's river, split by an island like a thought parting and returning, tugging barges, reflecting lamps, cooling tempers. When we say later that the river Tiber moves slowly tonight, we are naming a real thing. Water with a job, banks with steps, mooring rings that skin scrape, a current that makes a city patient. The law lives where light can find it. The 12 tables stand under a beam of sun like low trees in a line, letters rubbed to the shine of coin by centuries of fingers. A boy, still dusty from chasing a hoop, traces the line about summons and forgets half the words but remembers the rhythm. A girl in a neat tunic reads the painted slate that lists market days and fees for shaving weights. The chief of the pontiffs has marked today as fit for public business. The augurs, priests of the sky's grammar, have drawn their silent rectangle at dawn and watched birds cross it, beaks like commas. The day answers, proceed. The crier rolls his shoulders. His voice will carry later when the air thickens with voices. This is a city built on careful beginnings. Yet under the competence swims a current. Last year's dry weeks that blew grain away at threshing, shells of debts that make men tactless, old surnames that still enter a room with a little too much furniture, young veterans with a slow ache in one knee and a faster ache in the mind that asks, when will the city that stood on my back lift something from my shoulders? The answer lies in habits more than in heroics. Boards posted on time, cords stretched straight, promises written in the kind of sentence even a tired man can understand. Welcome, friend. Settle in, get comfortable, and let the noise of the outside world soften. This is your quiet corner of history, where the past unfolds slowly and gently. Whether you're here to drift into dreams, or letting this play softly in the background while you do something else, I'm glad you're here. Before we drift into history, what's one place in the world you'd love to see in person? Tell me in the comments when you wake. Begin at the hinge. Plebeians and patricians. One word means the many. Farmers with clay under their nails even on feast days. Carriers whose shoulder calluses fit a yoke like a key in a lock. Smiths who taught iron to keep time. Freedmen who learned to love ink more than applause. The other word names older houses, keepers of rights and treaties, men whose ancestors used to be introduced by their ancestors. If the city were a door, these two orders would be the leaf and the frame, and the hinge is procedure. Short years and paired seats, appeal that pauses punishment, published counsel that lets memory out of cupboards. Whenever the door sticks, and it does, Rome sands and oils the hinge rather than smashing the frame. That is the trick the whole Mediterranean will remember her for. Watch the hinge work in a lane near the cattle ground. A creditor's fingers have found a man's sleeve as if the cloth were rope and the man were a post. A tribune steps in, palm up. Stop. That one word is the echo of 1,000 throats muttered on a scrubby hill. It does not forgive debt. It forbids haste. 10 minutes later, they are under the law board together, tracing the line that says interest already paid counts toward principal, and what remains must be spread by seasons. The creditor, who likes his tablets neat, is mollified. The debtor, who has a stubborn pride about paying for what he eats, is steadied. The crowd, which had begun to lean forward with the appetite of all crowds, discovers it still has time to buy bread. Law is not the enemy of mercy. It is mercy put on a calendar. Up on the hill, in a room that smells like old wood and staunch tea, the elders gather. The Senate no longer speaks through a crown, it speaks through contracts and counsel. After the second board of 10 men tried to put law in their pockets and were put out of office, with their pockets turned inside out, the Horatian repairs taught 3 permanent habits, 449 BCE. Appeal is a wall, not a curtain. A tribune is sacred because the people say so, and everyone else agrees to believe it. The elders' advice must be sealed and kept, so a future crowd can read what a past crowd decided. A city that writes for itself can reread itself when tempers bloat. By late morning, the square is loose-limbed. An Adal, the market's quiet magistrate, hangs an honest weight on a nail where hands can touch it and tells a young seller to do the same tomorrow. A boundary stone is reseated with a cord and a public knot. A notice goes up, grain barges promised by the 3rd hour tomorrow, because early information is as good as extra bread. On the edge, where dogs sleep and boys kick at nothing, the river Tiber takes the color of the sky and behaves like an adult. Rome chooses, once more, to be strong in a way that looks a lot like good manners. In the evening, lamps will lay trembling ladders on that water, and we will be able to say it plainly. The river Tiber moves slowly tonight, and mean not only water but also the peace of a city that learned to pause itself. If you want to see a republic pull out a splinter without tearing the hand, watch Rome take up marriage. For years, patrician houses and plebeian houses were kept apart by a rule that pretended to protect the gods but mostly protected surnames. It said, in effect, that love should heed a ledger. In 445 BCE, a tribune named Gaius Canaleus asked the city whether a soldier who bleeds in the same line is good enough to kneel at the same hearth. The answer became the Lex Canaleia, intermarriage across orders allowed. Did the sky fall? No. Dowry chests still opened, household gods still took their portion of bread. A grandmother who had practiced her disapproval on a set of syllables found herself singing to a baby who wore those syllables like a bright ribbon. The next knot sat at the top bench. The consulship, the year's 2-man yoke, had settled into old hands as if those chairs had been tailored. But Rome had grown, and a single pattern could not carry every load. Between 444 and 367 BCE, the city tried years with military tribunes with consular power, 3, 4, sometimes 6 men sharing the work. It was furniture moving, not foundation pouring, but it taught everyone how flexible a strong room can be. Then 2 tribunes, Gaius Licinius Stolo and Lucius Sextius Lateranus, did the slow, unshowy work of tying 3 cords together and pulling for a decade. First cord, debt relief, the arithmetic kind. Interest already paid counts toward principal. Remaining sums may be scheduled. Second cord, a limit on public land, 500 iugera per man, call it roughly 300 acres, so the ager publicus, won by common risk, would not become private pasture by stealth. Third cord, the top chairs must open by right, not favor. Of the 2 consuls each year, one may be plebeian. The bundle, remembered as the Licinian Sextian laws, finally passed in 367 BCE. Lucius Sextius became the first plebeian consul. The sky, stubbornly, remained on its hooks. Because someone had to mind courts while consuls minded spears, a new chair appeared beside theirs, the praetorship. A praetor's business was not banners but forms. Each spring he posted an edict, promises about which old legis actions he would keep, which ones he would cut around with fresh formula, and how he would guide facts to fairness without cracking the furniture. Men copied the board. Notaries earned tired hands and steady respect. The law began to grow like a hedge rooted in old soil, clipped back where it snagged tunics, full of small birds and practical shade. Public land, the ager publicus, stayed bruised. Victory drags open ground behind it. Someone must say, enough. The 500 iugera line was partly a stick and partly a sermon. Men stretched it like damp leather. Censors, those 5-year magistrates with a talent for memory, tried to let it dry tight again. They set grazing caps, they peered at shepherd counts, they refused to renew crooked contracts. Perfection never arrived. What arrived was acknowledged limits, and that is a republic's favorite flavor. Debt itself moved from theater to ledger. The old ritual called nexum, binding a free body for a private debt, was cut by the Lex Poetelia Papiria, traditionally 326 BCE, sometimes 313 in later tellings. From then on, property answered for promises. Flesh did not. Creditors kept counting, debtors kept sweating, the city kept its soldiers from dreading their own doorposts. You can't measure how many marriages were kinder for it. You can only tell that kitchens grew quieter. Religion widened its face without shedding weight. The Lex Ogulnia of 300 BCE opened more seats among the augurs and pontiffs to plebeians. Omens kept their grammar, calendars kept their gravity, suspicion lost some claws. When an augur shut a day, men stopped spitting the word trick and started mending gutter stones. The Fetials, priests who wrapped even war in oaths, still tied anger to sentences before spears flew. The Rex Sacra mumbled a monarchy-scented rite with no power attached to the sound. Rome had learned the art of limits that bless. Now walk the forum at the second hour on a thick market day once these changes have settled into bones. The concilium plebis, the plebeian assembly, meets by tribes under swaths of shade. The talk is not thunder, it is administration, how far booths may jut, how wide wheel rims may be in lanes, what fine for mixing husks in flour, which hours a mill must rest so mothers can have quiet afternoons. You would be surprised how often a marriage is saved by a good rule about wheel rims. A tribune listens to a leather worker who knows the width of a strap and adds a handspan to a clause. An aedile tests a weight, taps it once, and writes a name that will sting for a month and protect a neighborhood for a year. The crowd approves the tone. Less vengeance, more maintenance. And in the houses around the square, in the rooms where history decides whether to stick, a father comes home from court having lost and pours himself a cup without breaking the cup because the judgment had a sentence he could point to. A mother draws a little circle of nundinae on the door lintel so her sister won't miss the cheap oil day. Children practice the old legis actiones like tongue twisters and then learn the newer formulae that fit facts like sandals. What law wants at the end is not awe but calm. As shadows lengthen, the island throws 2 sheets of the Tiber against the bank, and barges knock the timber posts with that hollow, reassuring thump that says tomorrow will be like today in the best ways. When the lamps catch, we can say it again and be exact. The river Tiber moves slowly tonight, and the city is learning to love that pace. Struggle of the orders sounds like trumpets and banners. In the mouth, it tastes like carpentry. Let's lay out the joins so we can feel the grain. First, the Valerio-Horatian repairs, 449 BCE. Appeal, provocatio made into a wall you can lean on. Tribunes made sacrosanct by the people's vow and the city's consent. The elders' advice, senatus consulta, published and kept so council stops being smoke. Then Canuleius, 445 BCE, who unlatched marriage and allowed houses to sew themselves together across that old seam. After the furniture-moving years of consular power without the name, the Licinian Sextian Bundle, 367 BCE, debt arithmetic that gives dignity a ladder, land limits that keep the common field from disappearing into capes, and a rule that of 2 top chairs, one may be plebeian by right. Add the praetor with his edict, a seasonal promise to carry facts through old fences, cut the rope of Nexum with Poetelius's knife, open priesthoods with Ogulnius's hand, grease the legislative path with the Publian measures, 339 BCE, Q. Publius Philo, which moved the elders' assent where it belonged and insisted that votes meant what they said, and closed the long argument with Hortensius, 287 BCE, who wrote what everyone had already learned: what the plebs decide binds everybody. When you stand back, the shape is clear. Pair power, shorten terms, publish rules, prefer forms to favors, and let more voices in. This shape lives best in kitchens. A girl learns that her dowry is not a bauble, but a trust. Tools and jars and coins to strengthen the house she joins, with a clean right of return if the union fails without her fault. She secures keys at her belt and keeps books as neatly as any quaestor, because law taught her to expect to be believed when she points. A boy recites the old legislations until the rhythm stops scaring him, then learns the formula. If it be proven that X, judge Y to pay Z within N days, and discovers the happiness of a sentence that fits. Appeal changes the weather. It used to be a rescue, now it is a reflex. A condemned man calls, a tribune raises a palm, the room moves from heat to light without losing either. Sometimes the punishment stays, sometimes it softens, always the city sees. Officers learn to be grateful for a hand that stops theirs before it does something shameful. Elders learn that a people who can pause are stronger than a crowd that only knows how to roar. The censors, those men who count men and then cleanse the state's lists, turn the Senate from an album into a ledger. Every 5 years, the lustrum bathes the numbers. Names go up and down. Contractors for roads and water are chosen. Their names are carved where cartwheels will polish them, and boys will practice letters on them. A man who salted gravel hears his name read on market day and discovers the particular heat of public embarrassment. A man who paid on time and kept stones tight finds himself invited to longer rooms and asked about drains. Shame and praise are cheap and effective. Rome is a frugal engineer. Religion keeps its weight and loses its sting. The Augulnian law makes augurs and pontiffs look more like the people they steady. The Ficials keep the oath that even war must confess itself aloud before it strikes. The Rex Sacrarum preserves a monarchy's sound as a kind of museum piece, while consuls walk past without flinching. The calendar becomes a public object, fit and unfit days posted, market cycles posted, feasts that respect court days and labor posted. When time itself is on a wall, trust blooms. At the edges where neighbors touch, where history is always a little raw, law stitches a quilt. Eaves must keep their rain, ditches their depth, servitudes allow feet and water where needed, and forbid wheels where they would chew up soil. Funerals are kept plain by rule, so grief does not become theater, and budgets do not become wounds. These stitches travel with men who plant colonies, a square with a well, 2 straight streets that cross, a small temple open to wind, a copy of the 12 tables etched in fair letters, a board of fasti open and closed days that smell like fresh wood. The mother city does not send soldiers only, she sends habits. Meanwhile the line breathes in 3 ranks, the maniple, younger men with pilum up front, older men with scuda behind, veterans as a hinge, drills until fear learns a job. The Via Appia, 312 BCE, runs south like a sentence you can walk. The Aqua Appia sighs under darkness and ends in light where women fill jars. Appius Claudius enrolls men the old order preferred to overlook, and even though later hands trim his rolls, no one unlays his stones. A nation learns to love straight lines and covered water more than it loves sharp hats. And every evening, as if to approve the lesson, the river Tiber slides past the cattle ground and under the bridge, a new face on old piles, and the sound of it is a kind of rule. Go on, do not rush. Lamps lay trembling ladders on it, boys practice their names in those rungs, dogs sigh. Rome is not gentle in every room, it is steady in enough rooms to matter. A republic is a machine for turning impatience into method. The most elegant gear in Rome's machine is a sentence from a year remembered more for quiet than for spectacle. 287 BCE, when a farmer named Quintus Hortensius took the emergency office of dictator, not to swing a sword, but to settle a strike of silence, and coaxed the city into passing a line of law that would outlive its author. Plebiscites bind the whole people. That line, Lex Hortensia, did not thunder. It clicked. From then on, when the Concilium Plebis, the plebeian assembly, wrote, everyone read, and the miracle was not power gained, it was friction lost. What the many decided no longer had to limp around the forum in search of senatorial assent, as if asking for a signature on a life already lived. To feel the price and the payoff of that clause, sit with the procedure that wrapped it. Rome did not simply vote, it staged its will. First, the promulgatio. A measure is posted in chalk and wax, read aloud at a concho, an open meeting without a vote, so that neighbors can argue with sentences instead of with elbows. The city requires a trinundinum, 3 market cycles, between proposal and decision, which means roughly 24 days for gossip to become criticism and criticism to become edits. During those weeks, the measure acquires shape. The tribune hears that wheel rims chew paving stones on the steep lane by the tannery. The aedile suggests a width. The millers grumble about hours. Mothers insist that 2 afternoons should be quiet by law. A clerk refines numbers, subtracts an unless, and moves a shall where it will hurt less and help more. On the chosen morning, the augur draws his silent rectangle in the air, templum, and reads the sky the way a jurist reads a text. Is the grammar fit? A favorable birdline is not superstition. It is a ritualized reminder that haste is expensive. If thunder speaks where silence is prescribed, the city waits. Rome has learned to enjoy waiting when the cost of speed is law that the next wind will undo. When the hour is right, tribes gather by neighborhood, 35 of them, each a human map of lanes and fields. A rogator calls names, citizens cross the rope, drop their little markers, tesserae, into the appropriate baskets. A tribune may speak once more briefly, then quiet. The tellers count. The count is posted. Nothing is secret, everything is formal. The measure passes or fails in sunlight. After Lex Hortensia, the path from passing to power is short and smooth. Scribes seal copy and post. 1 tablet stays in the city chest. Oak lids, bronze rings, wax already patched along edges where impatient fingers have worried it. 1 tablet goes to the archives of a nearby colony, carried by a boy with dust in his sandals, who has been told to keep to the crown of the road and to sleep with the tablet under his cloak. A 3rd is read aloud in the square on the next market morning, so those who cannot read can still own the rule. If it concerns weights, the aediles hang the city's set on hooks and invite anyone to compare them. If it concerns lanes, the aediles stretch cords and chalk the stones where carts must not trespass. If it concerns mills, the aediles send a runner to each wheelhouse with a slate showing the new hours, and the runner signs a receipt so that memory becomes paper. On an ordinary day, this machinery settles questions too humble for statues and too central for chaos. A bill about gutter depth appears because the lane by the dye shop floods the neighbor's doorway with every sudden rain. The Contio hums. Deeper ditches are good. Deeper ditches swallow cartwheels. Owners must keep their stretch clean. What fine when they don't? Arguments become numbers. Numbers become a line. The line becomes a habit. And the habit becomes the kind of politeness that keeps tempers from turning into lawsuits and lawsuits from turning into feuds. The Comitia Centuriata, the assembly by centuries outside the sacred line, still handles war and the highest elections, its order of call favoring the rich, then listening wider as need requires. The Comitia Tributa, all citizens by tribes, still chooses many magistrates and passes leges that wear taller names. But the Concilium Plebis, plebeians by tribes, presided by tribunes, has turned from a petitioning crowd into a writer with teeth. Rome keeps 3 voices, because no single voice fits every sentence. The city's genius is not to pick a winner. It is to stagger responsibility so that when one assembly rushes, another can stall without insult. The nervous ache in all this is religion, which might have been a club for spoiling bad days. It did not become one, because the augurs, made broader in 300 BCE by the Lex Ogulnia, understood their art as calibration, not sabotage. When they closed the sky, they said not yet, not never. When they opened it, they made it plain that the gods do not carry bills, citizens do. A city that can name a closed day without rage can also accept a loss without conspiracy theories. That is not trivial. That is political adulthood. To feel all this in a body rather than a book, follow a single measure from doorway to doorway. Call it the quiet afternoon bill. It begins at a kitchen table where a woman measures oil, shushes a baby, and wishes the mill would stop rattling by mid-afternoon so the child will sleep. She tells a neighbor, who tells a cousin, who has a cousin who knows a tribune. The tribune does not promise. He asks questions. Which afternoons? How many each market cycle? What exceptions? A contio gathers beneath a fig awning. A miller says he will go broke. A carrier suggests an earlier start on the permitted days. An aedile calculates the cargo that can move before the 4th hour. A priest points to a festival that should be spared. A clerk writes it all into neat Latin that even a tired ear can follow. 24 days later, the tribes vote. The bill passes. The text is posted. On the next quiet afternoon, doorways become slightly cooler rooms. A baby sleeps. A father returns without the etched look a poor nap carves on a man's face, and a mother leans a clay lamp on its side to save oil and whispers a thanks that is not to a person but to a procedure. Far down the quay, the river Tiber takes the news the way it takes broken reeds, without comment and without rush. At night, the phrase feels earned. The river Tiber moves slowly tonight, and the city, having mastered one more inch of its own impatience, moves slowly with it. Debt, land, and honor, 3 stones that can make an arch or break a foot. Rome learned to shape them with law and embarrassment rather than with ropes and noise. Begin where pain stayed public longest, debt, and watch it move from theater to schedule. Before the Lex Poetelia Papiria, traditional date 326 BCE with a stubborn alternate of 313 in later lists, a man who could not pay a private loan might be bound. Nexum, his body pledged like collateral in a market's shadow. The scene was a moral education for no one. Creditors enjoyed pressure. Debtors learned despair. Bystanders discovered that the Republic's care could be distracted by errands. Poetelius's knife cut that knot. From then on, property answered for coins, flesh did not. A creditor still had tools, sureties, pledges, seizure of goods, plenty to secure prudence. What he lost was the sugar high of public domination. Rome did not become generous, Rome became civilized. Watch the new habit run. A farmer, call him Marcus, has missed 2 payments. A creditor, call him Gaius, knows Marcus is not a liar. They meet with a scribe at a tribune's bench. The scribe reads the posted clause, interest already paid counts toward principal, and taps a stylus at each future date. Tap after sowing, tap after first pruning, tap after harvest, tap after sale. The sound is homeopathic justice, tiny, regular, swallowed without drama. Marcus leaves with a schedule and bruised pride. Gaius leaves with more confidence in his ledger than he ever got from tying a man to a post. 2 wives sleep. 2 households remember that law is not the enemy of payment. It is the friend of punctuality. Now take the second stone, land, and mark it with a line that turned out to be both sermon and stick. 500 Eugera, about 300 acres, the Licinian limit on the use of ager publicus by one man. Victory makes land. Victory also makes greed. The limit did not abolish greed, it taught greed to hesitate. The censors, men chosen to think in 5-year pulses, checked shepherd counts, capped grazing, refused to renew leases that smelled of tricks. Some years the line blurred, some years it bit. Even when it blurred, the existence of the line steadied arguments. A great man stared across a valley and did arithmetic instead of poetry. A small man watched him hesitate and gathered the courage to ask for his legal share. That pause saved 100 quarrels a year. The pressure land always builds and finds a release valve that makes Rome gentler by sending Rome outward, colonies. Not occupation garrisons only, but towns with habits inside. 2 right-angled streets, a square, a small temple open to wind, a copy of the 12 tables, a board of fasti, hooks for weights, a place to wash down the market after feast days, a well-curbed shape to sit on. Veterans planted vines in rows that looked suspiciously like camp streets, and taught their children to stack amphorae by weight, because the aedile's peg said so. In those little cities, men learned to be Roman without standing in Rome. The law traveled better than monuments. Honor, the third stone, shifted from a costume to a reputation. The Lex Ovinia, its date eats arguments, but its effect is clear. Put the role of the Senate in the censors' hands. No longer could 1 year's magistrates pack the room with clients. Now 2 men with long attention spans curated membership. Meanwhile, the Lex Genusia, 342 BCE, limited the stackability of power. No 2 magistracies in 1 year, no repeats too quickly, and took a swing, a glancing one often, at interest. The movement was steady, a ladder with measurable rungs, space to breathe between them, and public men judged by durability, not volume. Under these pressures and permissions, a new nobility took shape. Nobiles. Families known because names returned to the board often. Some were old patrician houses that learned to love work. Some were plebeian lines that had acquired the curule chair and the posture that comes with surviving scrutiny. A boy who copied the fasti in school began to see not only who his city had been, but who it preferred to be. Men who let roads drain and water run and courts pause. The glamour of competence slipped its arm through the glamour of lineage and whispered, "Let's go together." The equestrian order, men wealthy enough to keep a horse, paraded at the Transvectio, the annual ride that looked less like splendor than like inventory. Their value, increasingly, was not only cavalry in a line, but money with manners. Men who could fund carts, build warehouse roofs that did not leak, and keep accounts that let grain arrive when calendars said it must. The later age of tax farming would show a teethier profile. For now, think of equestrians as the city's practical middle, keeping commerce upright while magistrates learn to love receipts. Patronage, the old staircase of dependency, softened into a ramp with landings. A patron still received salutations in the morning, lines of clients who needed letters and introductions. But more and more often, the patron's value was not the promise to bend a judge. It was the habit of saying, "Here is the clause. Go with this notary. Tell the aedile I sent you." Clients left with paper instead of favors, and they grew freer for it. A patron who liked applause learned to like gratitude he hadn't earned with menace. One who could not learn was measured by a censor's nota and by the way people stopped using his bridge. On a plain day near dusk, when the island in the river Tiber pushes the current into two calm sheets, you can read the city's balance in the ordinary. A woman adjusts a lamp lid to save oil because the aedile fined a seller for shaving. A carrier touches the official weight on the hook before he lifts a sack. A boy walks past the contractor's stone and reads a name aloud just to hear the sound of honest work. Honor lives there, not in the purple stripe alone. And debt, land, honor, the three stones, hold as an arch because shame and law share the weight. You can almost hear the arch breathe when a man signs a schedule instead of making a scene. You can almost see it when a field's boundary is reset with a muttered vow and a child's hand on the stone. You can smell it when a road has a proper crown and last night's rain has gone where drains send it. If you listen under the talk, you will catch the undertone. We do not need to be beautiful. We need to be fair. That sentence is the city's pride. At night, the phrase returns because the water tells the truth with fewer words than we use. The river Tiber moves slowly tonight, and the city, stitched together by schedules and limits, keeps time with it. If law in Rome feels like carpentry, the praetor is the man with the plane. Consuls lead men and make loud decisions. Censors count men and make long decisions. The praetor watches men collide over things and shaves splinters until edges fit. His tool is the edict, posted each spring like a promise. These are the routes he will honor through the thicket of legal forms. These are the formula he will accept to carry hard facts where old fences block. These are the interdicts, quick orders, he will issue to stop harm while talk catches up. To grasp his art, you need to feel the old wood under the new plane. The earliest actions, legis actionis, were ritual frames, sacramentum, a formal wager that framed a dispute, manus iniectio, laying a hand to enforce a judgment, pignoris capio, seizing a pledge in specific sacredly flavored debts, and a few more. They had poetry and teeth, but they were narrow. You either fit or you didn't. In a growing city, facts often come to court with odd angles. So the praetor developed the formulary, a written instruction to a private judge, iudex, stating the point to be proven and the consequence to follow if it is. If it be proven that the defendant wrongfully cut the plaintiff's vines, condemn him in the measure of damages. If not, absolve. Dry? Yes. Beautiful? Also yes. Consider a day's docket. First case, possession of a small courtyard. Both sides shout mine, which is useless. The praetor does not decide the title on the spot. He issues an interdict, ut possidetis, freezing the situation. As you now possess, so you shall possess, provided no violence, no stealth, no permission. Then he sets a day to argue the underlying right. This keeps knives sheathed and furniture unmoved while light is found. The city learns that stopping can be just as rewarding. Second case, a goat and greens, damages. Here the praetor leans on a newish statute with old roots, the Lex Aquilia, late 3rd century BCE by most reckonings, which teaches Rome to price harm in coin instead of in anger. If a man wrongfully kills a slave or a 4-footed herd animal, pay the highest value in the past year. If he damages, pay the value in the past 30 days. Over time, clever judices stretch kills to ruins and damages to many dents. Today, the goat's owner pays for greens at market price and mends a fence. The neighbor swallows some pride. No one becomes poor. Both become sleepable. Third case, a contract dressed as friendship. A potter lent jars to a cousin. The cousin forgot to return them. Is it commodatum, loan for use, depositum, keeping safe, or mutuum, consumable loan? The words matter, so do witnesses. The praetor picks a iudex with a square head and gives him a formula to sort the words and weigh the jars. By sunset, the cousin pays coins for broken clay, and the potter promises to write better receipts. The family dines together in a week because the court did not make anyone a villain. It made them both tidier. Fourth case, a boundary worn away by rain and memory. The praetor appoints iudex to walk the line with a corded measure and a witness. He adds a penalty if the losing side moves the stone after sunset. The iudex returns with numbers. The parties sign, names pressed into wax like seals into soft clay. That press is the sound of peace. Fifth case, a whisper of theft. A girl in a shop says a neighbor's boy slipped a small knife. The praetor does not permit a mob. He sends a viator, an usher, with the parties for a search under formula, furtum conceptum, to be done with witnesses and without breaking doors. The knife is found not in the neighbor's basket, but on a shelf where the shopkeeper's apprentice left it. Apologies. A coin changes hands for insult. A girl learns that the law can distinguish embarrassment from crime. Between these matters, the praetor writes edged lines the city will use for years. A fresh formula for damage done by smoke from a dye house. A cautious extension of Aquilian reasoning to spilled oil that ruined goods in the next stall. A new interdict to clear rubble within 3 days of a house collapse on a narrow lane. These are small notes. They save large tempers. What about the legislation? They do not vanish. They retreat to places where their ritual still guards against lying. A stubborn plaintiff may still insist on a sacramentum and deposit bronze in court to show he means it. A creditor who has a final judgment may still use manus injectio in its tamed, supervised form. Old forms become fences along new roads, not the roads themselves. The iudex, that private citizen who hears and decides, remains Rome's quiet glory. He is not a professional, he is a neighbor with a reputation. The parties choose him from a posted list. If they cannot agree, names are drawn. He sits under an awning, listens without hurrying, and writes a word that ends a story. Because he must go on living among the people he judges, he learns to love proportion. The law preserves that love by keeping his name clean. No bribes, no winks, no torches at the door. If he lies or takes gifts, the censors remember. The market remembers faster. In family life, the praetor's plane smooths what customs build. Marriage can still occur by conferiatia, the old solemn rite with a spelt cake before sacred fire. By coemptio, a symbolic purchase with bronze and scales before witnesses, or by usus, a year and a day together that ripens into a tie unless the woman takes 3 nights out to keep her legal independence. The dowry travels with her to fuel the house and largely returns if the union ends without her fault. The praetor honors these forms, intervenes when guardians are fools or predators, and nudges property back to the hands that work it. The aim is not romance. The aim is stability. Death is kept out of the city's throat by rules that are both hygienic and moral. No burials inside the sacred boundary. No gold on the pyre, except what keeps a tooth honest. No wailing hired to bully the living with grief. Names go by the road, where travelers read them and children ask questions that teach humility. The praetor does not invent these rules, he guards them. When a wealthy fool tries to turn mourning into theater, the aedile fines. The praetor blesses the fine, the censors remember at the next lustrum. Pride learns its place. Because time itself can injure, the law keeps calendars as tools. The fasti, open and closed days, hang where all can see. After Hortensius, tribunes begin to date obligations in their bills, by the 3rd market day, within 10 days after harvest. This is the Republic's genius in a phrase. It converts virtue into schedule. Men who could never be persuaded become perfectly obedient to a deadline. All of this, edict, iudex, interdict, formula, fasta, sounds cold until you watch a household in the 2nd hour of night. A woman puts a lamp on its side to slow the oil. A man tells his son why the boundary stone matters more than the story about the general's horse. A girl copies a formula on wax and falls asleep with the stylus in her hand. Through the door's crack, you can hear the river Tiber pressed between the quay and the island, moving with a patience that makes even the impatient yawn. The phrase is not a flourish, it is a report. The river Tiber moves slowly tonight, and so does the city that learned to make slowness a virtue. The market is the city's diary, written in smells and sounds before any clerk sets down a line. At first light, the square opens like a book whose pages are stalls, meat that blushes in the morning air, jars of oil with skins tight as drumheads, bread freckled with sesame where a baker got fancy, baskets of onions tied with twine that will be reused later for a child's toy. You could come here with a blindfold and still know the day. The iron bell of a knife tapped on a hook, the dry clack of a scale pan, a crier's voice braided into a dozen smaller conversations. Nothing here is free of law, and almost nothing feels like it. That is the aedile's art. There are two pairs now, plebeian aediles, born with the tribunate in the first secession, and curule aediles, a later, shinier office with the right to the curule chair and an expectation to host shows. Between them they are the city's caretakers, guardians of weights and measures, police of markets and streets, tenders of temples, arrangers of grain and games. Soldiers get songs, aediles get results. Watch them work and you will see why Rome prefers competence to brilliance. An aedile comes early to hang the official weights, little bronze truths, on iron pegs where any hand may test a merchant's claim. He rubs each with a cloth as if waking it. He greets it by name, the pound that has served 3 consuls, the half that came dented and now rings true, the quarter with a notch that children recognize like a friend's scar. At the meat stalls, he checks hooks and height so that flies are a nuisance, not a plague. At the oil cellars, he peers over the rim to make sure the liquid sits clear above the lees. At the wine shops, he looks not at the amphorae, which lie, but at the lips of cups, which tell the truth about whether water has been mixed beyond custom. He writes very little. This is discipline, not laziness. Paper should be dust, not fog. A name goes up on a blackboard only when the shaving of weights is deliberate, or a cellar keeps a false bottom in his measure, or meat is hung where the sun bites it. Then the stylus bites as well, a fine that stings but does not ruin, a ban from the stall front for a month, the command to hang the honest weight on a nail in the shop so customers can touch it with their own fingers. In a week, a neighbor tries a trick and does not, because the board remembered last month's name and so did everyone else. The aediles are part chemists too. They test grain by pinch and by ear, good wheat squeaks, bad wheat sighs, and they know the weight of a wet sack when a carrier tries to sell the river with the barley. When storms delay barges, they prevent panic by posting timelines. A little slate on a post by the quay can soothe 1,000 stomachs. 2 barges from upstream at the 3rd hour tomorrow. Extra carriers hired. See names below. Those names are not decorations. They are accountable. You can find the carrier whose shoulders kept bread in the city and thank him by buying him a cup when you meet him at the bath. Gratitude sticks best to people with names. They keep an eye on lanes too, and on the ways stalls creep the way ivy creeps. A bench that juts a handspan into a walking line will jut too if you let it. So cords come out, chalk comes down, and aedile speaks softly while the stallholder shoves back the board he swore had not moved since Romulus. Wheels have limits also. Rims wider cut stone less. Iron shoes keep carts honest where they cross paving. All of this sounds small until you have watched a cart split a paving block into a trip that breaks an old woman's fall and the whole week that follows like dominoes through a family. A city is a chain of such consequences. Aediles are the fingers that keep it from kinking. They are showmen by duty as well. The curule aediles put on games and markets of splendor, not merely to dazzle, though they do, but to bind a city in a shared calendar. Seating becomes politics in a milder key. Order becomes pleasure. A boy who watches a procession of actors and oxen pass a temple front learns 2 lessons at once. His city claims the street, and it knows how to put itself away when the show is over. Even the macellum, the covered market that grows like a practical poem, arcades for fish, a circle for meat, a central tholos with a well, has rules, washed down after closing, entrails carried to a pit, blood sluiced where drains can forgive it. Beauty here is the absence of smell by the 2nd hour. Women own the system with a kind of cheerful tyranny. They come armed with lists and memory, and nothing makes a seller more honest than a mother who can quote last year's mill hours from a tribune's bill and last month's fine from the aedile's board. They bargain like jurists, appeal to custom as if to a friendly god, and teach children to test a cup's lip the way a soldier tests a shield's rim. When the mill wheels turn too late on market eve, It is they who lift a petition to a tribune. When the bill passes 24 days later, because the augur found the sky fit, it is they who savor the quiet of an afternoon when babies do not startle at the clatter. The market has its collegia, associations more for rites and funerals than wages yet, and even these live under the aedile's ordinary spell. They are allowed to meet if they keep their books, care for their altars, and do not imagine themselves a city within the city. When a guild buries one of their own with decency and without gold, the aedile nods past them without stopping because nothing needed fixing. The best compliment in Rome is to be ignored while doing your duty. And then there is Ostia, the river mouth town that feeds all this politeness. The port is older than most memory, swollen in living time by quays, warehouses, and the habit of moving goods like thoughts, upstream by barge, across the square by shoulder, into jars by steady hands. The aediles know every ring on the quay where rope bites. They can tell you which eddies make a captain swear. They schedule unloading crews by the Nundine cycle, so the right backs arrive when the right boats nose in. It is only poetry to men who do not need to eat. At sunset, when the island splits the current into two swathes of bronze and smoke, the market learns silence. Stalls fold, a last rinse shivers over stone, a boy drags a broom with more pride than care, an aedile checks the hooks once more and pockets his chalk. You could make a statue of him, but he would prefer you did not. He wants the city to forget him until the morning when forgetting costs blood. Meanwhile, the river Tiber moves slowly tonight, and the square breathes like a chest that has learned to keep time. Every 5 years, the city inhales, holds, and exhales. The ritual is older than most names and more honest than most speeches. The census and the lustrum. Men enter by tribes, give their names, ages, sons, property, debts, and the tools by which they eat. The answers could sound like confession in another city. Here they sound like citizenship. The censors ask without apology because the city undertakes to see and to weigh, and a city that will ask must also restrain. The lustrum, a cleansing sacrifice, follows the counting as a kind of thanks, not magic. The message is simple. Numbers are serious, so are people. From those lists, the censors perform their two gentlest tyrannies. The first is Lectio Senatus, the reading of the Senate, curating a house that once curated itself by habit. Entrance is praise. A nota is not mere stain, but a public reason why a man's name sits lower than it did. The grounds are not trivial. Fraud in contracts, cruelty in power, profligacy that makes creditors a state problem, shabby work on bridges that throw people into rivers. A century from now, satirists will mock overreach. In these decades, the nota mostly reads like civic hygiene. Boys copy the list of senators after each lustrum and learn two truths at once. Names endure, names can fall. The second tyrant is a public contract, the letting of roads, drains, temple repairs, bridges, and water, through auction and oath. The censors hold out the work like a plank and ask, who will carry this with lowest cost and highest oath? Men step forward with sums and with sureties. Those who win see their names carved into stones where cartwheels will polish them and children will read them aloud. Failure is visible in the same way. When a crown is wrong and water pools in the middle of a road, people do not say, the city failed. They say the contractor failed, and they know where he lives because his name is on the stone he salted. Accountability turns anger into a lesson instead of a riot. Rome's roads become the censor's poetry. Via Appia south from the gate, Appius Claudius Secus's stubborn sentence of stone, later spurs and extensions by lesser poets, basalt set atop layers that make the whole road one object, statumen, the foundation of fist-sized stones, rudus, a concretion of gravel and lime, nucleus, fine mortar, and the summa crusta, the wearing surface. The road has a crown like a king who knows how to shed water. Ditches flank it. Shoulders allow avoidance. Milestones count not just distance, but care. A man with no letters can tap the number cut into the stone and know how far home is. A woman who has never left the city can tell by the way carts sing whether the paving is young. A child sitting on a milestone to eat a fig learns the shape of an empire without anyone saying the word. Water follows stone the way grace follows practice. The Aqua Appia, a covered conduit that hums under the city, is a censor's gift in a century that liked its gifts. You cannot see most of it. That is the point. An open channel is an invitation to theft, pollution and sun. A covered one is a promise kept in silence. The gradient is a whisper, falling just enough to run. The conduit is lined to resist the world's appetite. Outflows are spouts set where jars can rise comfortably. The first time a woman realizes her child coughs less because water arrived, she did not have to coax from a hill. The city earns more loyalty than a triumph gives. Censors are scolds with good taste. They write small rules that make big differences. No contractor may substitute soft stone where hard is specified. Lime to be slaked fully, inspection by tapping tool. Bridge approaches to be paved to the length of 100 feet on either bank. These lines are boring to read and exhilarating to walk. They also insist on postings. When work is left, a board goes up. When work is done, a board stays with the names. Glory used to mean a wreath. It now also means being the reason a traveler doesn't fall in the dark. Not everything they do is stone. They watch manners in the old, hard sense, mores, and are allowed sparingly to mark a man for conduct that injures the city's face, a public beating outside law, a blasphemy so loud it shakes order, a meanness that uses funerals to intimidate. They do not chase gossip. They do not legislate love. They do, sometimes, remove a man from a tribe or order, and the sting lasts longer than any fine because it is paid in lost company. At Ostia and along the river, the censor's hand is lighter and longer. Warehouses rise in rows like careful teeth. Stairs at the quay are rebuilt where the mud tried to eat them. Mooring rings are set at heights that forgive both flood and drought. Custom points are moved to where congestion will not choke both trade and patience. They lease out portoria, tolls, and vectigalia public revenues, with terms that reward honesty more than cleverness. For a generation or two, the farmers of taxes behave like respectable men because contracts make it profitable to be so. When they later learn to bite, Rome will invent new tools. For now, the teeth are aligned. All of this counting and cleansing culminates in a walk nobody writes about because nobody notices it. A censor going home at twilight with grit on his sandals and the satisfaction peculiar to men whose victories look like others' routines. He will stop under the steps of the Temple of Concord, listen for a moment to the voice of the square, pots, dogs, self-important young men, and then look down at the river to make sure it is moving the way a river should. He will sleep because he has decided where water goes, where stone sits, and whose name belongs on a list, and those decisions will let strangers eat bread without knowing who they ought to thank. When the city gathers at dawn for the lustrum, the sacrifice does not forgive sins, it blesses methods. Men who were counted are now cleansed, not as an erasure, but as a renewal. Numbers return to being neighbors. A child is allowed to flick wine at his father with a sprig and laugh when the old man pretends to be offended. The censors allow themselves to smile because the joke is older than both of them and cleaner than most jokes in most cities. And then it is back to dust and lime and signatures. A contractor who cut a corner is called to the post. A work gang gets paid without delay because delay is theft. A cornerstone is set, and the censor's name is whispered, not shouted. The river Tiber moves slowly tonight, but it moves, and so does the long work that makes fairs fair and floods survivable. Rome's pride is that you can walk on it. Public law impresses. Private law persuades. A city becomes decent not when its squares are orderly, but when its rooms are reliable. Rome's rooms are thick with names and forms that sound like furniture because they are. Sit down, we will lay them out. Marriage comes in 3 main timbers, each with a different weight of hand. The oldest, conferiatio, belongs to houses that crave the white chill of antiquity. A priest, a spelt cake shared, 10 witnesses, words that taste like smoke and honey, the bride passing under a yoke as if to whisper that household work and sacred burden are kin. Conferit marriages tie families to certain priesthoods. They are prestigious, exacting, and rare. The second, coemptio, is a purchase that isn't. Bronze and scales, a circle of witnesses, a touch of the hand with formal words to mimic a sale. Its theater is practical. It binds a wife in manus under the legal hand of the husband, making the household a single legal purse. The third, usus, is so Roman you can hear a shopkeeper in it. A year and a day together ripens into marriage, unless the woman spends 3 consecutive nights away to keep herself sine manu, under her father's or her own legal hand. That is, unless is the city's quiet revolution. In practice, more and more respectable marriages live sine manu, leaving the wife's property hers, not absorbed into her husband's estate, and putting her dowry in the category of trust, not trophy. The dowry travels with her to fuel the new house, property, cash, tools, sometimes a clever slave whose account books are a work of art. If the union fails without her fault, much of it returns. The legal word is repende, things to be taken back, and the practice turns drama into arithmetic. Men who treat the dose as their own learn to fear courts kept by men who love columns more than anecdotes. Children are born into the long shade of patria potestas, the father's power. It looks terrifying on tablets and feels ordinary in rooms. The father may acknowledge or refuse a newborn, may expose, though custom and love have spent a century reducing that ugliness to rarity, may adopt if the child passes from one father to another, adrogatio if an independent person submits himself to a new father by public vote, may emancipate a son by a formal triple sale to break the old tie, so that the boy becomes a legal person with his own purse. The power is bounded by custom, shame, and increasingly law. A father who breaks his child is no longer considered strong, he is considered a public problem. When a father dies intestate, the law reads his will for him, first sons in their agnatic line, failing that brothers, failing that the next male kin. But Romans are engineers, they like to choose. Wills come in flavors. The oldest testamentum in Appius Claudius is a public act before a people's assembly, a right as much as an instrument. The handier version, testamentum per esse et librum, piggybacks on the mancipatia, the bronze and scales form of transfer, to stage a symbolic sale of the estate to a trusted friend, familia emptor, with instructions on posthumous distribution. It is an elegant hack. Use the toughness of a property form to protect wishes. Later, testamentary practice will simplify. In this age, the ceremony keeps fraud honest and makes witnesses feel the seriousness of their own eyes. Guardianship, tutela, stands where power is missing. Pupillae minors need guardians. Women often do too, more in theory than in practice, since respectable women of property acquire tutors who rarely dare to oppose them. A tutor owes an account, and bad guardianship is a kind of theft the courts despise. The praetor's edict grows clauses like ivy around the core. Tutors who sell below value answer the difference. Tutors who refuse consent out of malice can be compelled. Tutors who waste a ward's goods are marked by censors and poor company. Property itself is a law's favorite toy. It can be held quiritairian at full civil right by modes as old as hills. Mancipatio, that bronze and scales ceremony for land, slaves, beasts of draught. In iure cessio, a staged lawsuit before a magistrate. Or usucapio, possession long enough in good faith to ripen into ownership. 2 years for land, 1 for movables, provided no theft tainted the start. These are not games. They are methods to make certainty public. A man who holds by usucapion sleeps more soundly than a man who holds by promise. Delict, wrong, comes in household quantities too. Furtum, theft, lives in 2 colors. Manifestum, caught in the act, with sharper penalties, and nec manifestum, found later, with measured fines. Iniuria, insult or injury, begins as a broad harm to dignity and narrows into actionable slights. Damnum iniuria datum, loss wrongfully caused, takes shape under the Lex Aquilia, teaching Romans to value harm in coin rather than in vengeance. The 12 tables keep some hard edges. Talio, retaliation in kind, appears but yields more and more often to composition, a payment agreed by parties or assessed by a judge. Imprisonment is not a punishment. Fines, exile, and infamy are. The aim of private law is not to express anger, it is to stop it. Freedom sits near the hearth. Slavery exists, no sugar around it, but Rome multiplies paths to manumission. A master may free vindicta with the light touch of a rod and words before a magistrate, censu by enrolling a slave on the census as a citizen, or testamento by will. A freed person, libertus or liberta, owes obsequium respect and certain services to the former master turned patron, but he or she owns a name, a purse, and a future. The child of a freedman is freeborn. By the 2nd generation, the 3-part Roman name, tria nomina, sits on shoulders that not long ago carried a collar. Lines blur, not perfectly, but more than in most cities that boast of their enlightenment. The law makes this thinkable, work makes it true. In the room, these grand words turn into habits. A woman ties keys at her belt and keeps a book by the shrine. Oil in, oil out, Debts owed, debts paid, jars whole, jars cracked, carriers who weigh fair, carriers avoided. A man comes home having lost a case and does not throw a stool because the judge's formula fits the facts, and the praetor's edict said what would happen. A boy learns that he must not move the boundary stone even the width of his thumbnail, and that if he does, the earth itself will be angry. A religious lie with valuable civic consequences. A girl learns to quote the dowry clause to her uncle and watches him retreat cheerfully because he loves her and cannot argue with a line nailed to a wall. Death is tamed. No burial inside the sacred boundary, no gilding beyond what fixes a tooth, no slashing of cheeks to bully the living with blood. The dead go by the road, where names catch the eyes of travelers and teach humility. The living return to quiet rooms. Law has made sorrow affordable, which is perhaps its most underrated gift. Outside, the world of forms is a river of its own. The island pushes the Tiber into 2 lanes of polished dusk. The bridge holds a trickle of footsteps. A porter balances a waterskin with the grace of a dancer. The phrase belongs here because it is a report more than a metaphor. The river Tiber moves slowly tonight, and the rooms of Rome, secured by forms, match it without knowing. If you want to see Roman genius without being blinded by marble, stand in a court for a day. Not the kind of court where kings preen, the kind where a praetor sits under an awning and index, a private man with a good name, takes notes on wax while neighbors listen with the boredom that marks a healthy system. The question is almost always the same. Who must bear this inconvenience, pay this sum, or change this habit so that we may go on living together? The day begins with the fixed legis actions, still alive where they protect truth by ritual. A claimant who insists on the old sacramentum, the formal wager, lays down coins to show he is not a windbag. His opponent stakes the same. The loser's stake becomes a fine. The ceremony is a fence. You can climb by newer stairs, but the fence reminds you why stairs were built. In another corner, manus injectio appears, tamed. A creditor, having obtained a judgment, lays hand on a debtor in the presence of a magistrate to begin a measured path to satisfaction. It looks brutal on tablets. It looks calm in practice, because Hortensius and Poetilius have taken the heat out of speed. Most of the day belongs to the formulary. The praetor dockets the case, writes the formula, names the iudex, and hands the matter off like a carpenter passing a plan to a steady foreman. A typical formula reads like a music score reduced to numbers. If it be proven that the defendant wrongfully damaged the plaintiff's vines by smoke from his dye house beyond customary measure, condemn him to pay the amount the judge shall assess. If it be not proven, absolve. The iudex then does what Rome trains citizens to do at dinner tables. Asks questions, weighs witnesses, looks for custom, and decides within measure. Furtum, theft, arrives 3 ways before noon. First, manifest theft. A boy is caught with a knife inside his tunic, the hilt still warm from the stall. The law's old sharpness shows. The 12 tables once multiplied penalties, even allowed hand-laying. The modern habit prefers composition, a multiple of the value, and a shame that travels farther than coin. Second, non-manifest theft. A jar missing, found later in a neighbor's storage. The remedy is 4-fold or 2-fold, depending on versions and times, but always countable. Third, conceptum, the search for stolen goods under formula with witnesses. The praetor's insistence on witnesses and on no doors broken turns what could be a riot into a small parade of calm people who end up apologizing or paying without knives. Injuria, injury or insult, used to cover anything that bruised dignity. The praetor has narrowed it without neutering it. To slap a free man in public is injuria. To insult a woman who runs a house is injuria. To follow someone shouting filth so his customers shrink is injuria. The iudex sets a sum by status, occasion, and tone. The aim is not to vindicate the thin-skinned. It is to keep markets from becoming arenas. Damnum injuria datum, loss wrongfully caused, has a spine now. The lex aquilia, a herd animal killed, highest value in a year. Goods damaged, value in 30 days. The Roman trick is not to value objects only, but to consider use. If smoke from your dye house ruins my wool, my loss is not the fleece, it is the color I could have sold. Judges learn to listen for context, which is simply another word for reality. An artisan explaining dye baths to a farmer is an education for both, and the reason they can meet in the street tomorrow without spitting. Public wrongs. what later ages will call crimes, are still partly the people's business. A capital charge may go to the comitia for judgment, judicium populi, and the right of appeal, provocatia, stands like a cypress at the edge of every such field. The Valerio-Horatian laws made it a wall. Subsequent practice has thickened it with cases. A man condemned calls, a tribune raises a palm, rods pause, reasons arrive. Sometimes the city still kills. It does so fewer times than most neighbors because procedure has replaced panic. Punishment in this age is not imaginative, which is its virtue. Fines bite, infamy stains, exile remains the last door a proud man opens for himself to avoid a worse death. Prison is a place to hold, not to punish. Corporal pain exists but must walk through forms so narrow it often cannot pass. A flogging without right can ruin a magistrate faster than a failed levy, because citizens like soldiers but love their skins. The afternoon brings servitudes and boundaries, the slow bread of justice. A man claims the right to draw water across another's field. The formula includes time of day, path width, and vessel size, pail, not cart. A woman claims light and view to a narrow court. The formula sets eve length and height. In a field dispute, the judge walks with a corded measure, stones in his pouch to reset what frost and memory moved. The neighbors follow like contrite dogs. At the end, both sign their names into wax with a stylus that belonged to neither. The sound of name into wax is the sound of resentment docking. The day ends with something like a play, a stipulatio staged in front of the praetor, where one party asks a question in set form, "Do you promise to pay 10 by the kalends?" And the other says, "I promise." That pair of lines has more force than friendship, and nearly as much as a god. The genius here is the public ear. Promises kept because they were overheard by a city that remembers better than most men. Everyone goes home mostly disappointed, which is how you know it was fair. The winner thinks the sum too small. The loser thinks the judge deaf. The bystanders think the day is long. The praetor takes down his edict and looks along the edges for curls where the sun warped the board, then stores it like a farmer pleased with a neat stack of hay. The iudex buys olives on the way and is recognized by nobody, which is what he deserves. At the river, broad and brown, barges shoulder toward the quay. A boy runs while balancing a platter of small fried fish. A woman carries a sleeping child like a jar she cannot drop. The water takes the square's noise and presses it flat. If you say, "The river Tiber moves slowly tonight," people will nod, not because you have said something poetic, but because you have described a fact that made half the city possible. A levee day is a census turned inside out. Men arrive by class, not dignity, but property. How much armor their purses can bear, how much weight their families can spare. At the top stand those who can kit themselves in bronze and fine. At the later lines, those with lighter shields and faster legs. Beyond them, men without kit who serve in ways that keep the army alive. Slingers, carters, diggers. Nobody pretends the ordering is moral. It is functional, and because it is transparent, it breeds less bitterness than a secret list would. The legion breathes in maniples now, not the old phalanx that made men into a wall too clumsy for hills. The front rank, hastati, are young men with pilum and nerve, meant to throw heavy spears that bend on impact so enemy shields carry their own humiliation. Behind them, the principes, older and more expensive in gear, lean into the moment when courage stops being a sound and becomes a weight. Behind them, the triarii, veterans whose job is not to impress but to hinge, to hold a line that wants to run or to turn a stand into a push. The proverb, res ad triarios venit, it has come to the triarii, is not about heroics, it is about timing. Pay is regular enough that a farmer does not come home to a house stripped by interest. Spoils are counted, not grabbed, and shares are posted in columns so that even the angry can see how the numbers add. The standard, a beast on a pole, more often practical than beautiful, draws eyes the way a well-placed lamp draws moths. To lose it is shame that lasts a generation. To keep it is the kind of pride men do not talk about, even drunk. All this would be brittle if Rome chose to stand alone. She does not. The Latin War, 340-38 BCE, ended not with the flattening of cousins, but with their reweaving into the fabric, some towns as citizens with vote, some as citizens without suffrage, rights in private law, commerce, marriage, appeal without the ballot, many as allies, socii, bound by federa, treaties that say in tidy clauses how many men, how much grain, how many carts. Pride is left in place, obligations are counted. The result is untidy on a map and durable on a march. In camp, Allied contingents pitch their tents by their own standards, keep their own songs, and funnel into a grid that does not care about accent. Streets run straight, drains run under them, gates sit at right angles so that an alarm is a path, not a maze. A Sabine trick for stacking wood meets a Latin habit of marking tent lines with knots. Both end up in Roman camps thereafter because usefulness is the only citizenship that matters in a storm. The oath, sacramentum, binds men to the commander with words that sound like clean wood, to follow orders, to not desert, to bring back or die with the shield, the old song, and to keep the camp laws, the newer prose. Punishment is often collective at the smallest unit because fear that your friend will suffer for your failure is a stronger motor than fear of pain. Decimation is rare enough to be a story, which is how it ought to be. Ordinary discipline is bread, water, ditch. Victory throws up a new problem: what to do with land. Rome's answer is not to pour all conquered ground into the throats of the rich, but to plant colonies, little squares of Rome with their own councils, their own weights on pegs, their own copy of the 12 tables. Veterans get strips, poorer citizens get plots, allies sometimes join, streets cross at right angles, a forum finds shade, a well finds an audience. A milestone goes up that counts distance in both directions, home and away. The road back to Rome is straight for a reason that is older than the empire and newer than a boy's thirst. The roads themselves are arguments in stone. Via Appia runs to Capua like a planned thought. Later it will reach Brundisium, and boots will carry treaties across it the way letters carry feelings across a table. The road's layers have a moral: depth before finish, drain before speed, crown before pride. When summer storms come, water tucks its chin and races the ditches rather than gnawing at joints. Work crews, often led by veterans whose eyes have learned to read ground, tamp rudis with a rhythm that turns into jokes and then into songs. If you listen, you can hear the republic in the hammer. Trade feels the change first. More carts travel safely. More pack animals arrive unbroken. Schedules harden into promises. In the Macellum, fish that were yesterday become fish that were this morning. In the potter's stalls, the standard neck for oil jars makes lids interchangeable, so a broken top does not spoil a whole vessel. Men who never learned letters learn threads of the network by smell. Where fennel comes bright, where oil comes peppery, where wine comes tired. The city breathes out into Italy and breathes Italy back in. Religion walks alongside with a decent gait. The Fetials, priests of borders and beginnings, carry their wool-braided bands to frontier stones, recite wrongs, and throw a spear into enemy ground before the fighting starts. It is not theater for the enemy. It is a prayer to the city's own memory. We told ourselves we would not make war like thieves. The augurs stand on hills before marches and read birds not to dictate a day, but to fit one. And a commander who ignores a bad sign learns to love delay when a storm breaks where his lines would have stood. When men come home, they bring the camp with them in manners. A veteran lays out a vineyard in straight rows because his body now believes straightness saves time. He keeps a spade by the door the way he kept a pilum by his bed. He trusts the aid aisles because queues in a market look like his best mornings before a march. He is kinder to children than he was to recruits because he has learned the difference between teaching and breaking. His wife trusts the city because while he was away, the tribunes kept mills to hours, the praetor turned quarrels into coins, and the censors made the bridge stand up after floods. Allies turn into neighbors in slow seasons. A Latin trader marries a Roman woman through connubium, the right intermarriage law protects, and their children learn to cross two streets at once. A Samnite with a knack for iron sets up a forge in a colony and invents a hinge for cart bottoms that singing roads prefer. Vocabulary blends. So do recipes. The sound of Italy becomes a chord. At night, when campfires have become lamps in rooms and the metallic chatter of armor has become spoons, the river Tiber moves slowly as if counting. On its bank, a boy balances on a milestone while his father pretends to wobble and then steadies him with 2 fingers. The boy will not remember the joke. He will remember the feeling of being held by something that knows what it is doing. That is Rome at her best. We have wandered from secessions to Senate lists, from weights on pegs to oaths in camps, from dowries folded like maps to drains that hum under stone. If you pull the long thread through all of it, the pattern is clear enough to name without pride. Rome did not solve herself. She practiced herself. She learned to keep a form and replace its parts. The tribunate began as a shield, a palm raised in a doorway, and became a pen that drafts rules so the palm can rest. The Senate began as a room that liked its own echo. Curated by censors, it turned into a ledger that liked drains more than adjectives. The right of appeal began as a shout that shamed roads into pausing. It turned into a reflex that dignified both accuser and accused by making a breath between anger and harm to the city's normal air. The concilium plebis began as a crowd of injured. With Lex Hortensia, it grew into a writer whose sentences bind elders and neighbors alike. The praetor's edict began as a novelty. It has become a tradition that respects last year's good sense and adds this year's corrections, like a careful carpenter shaving where a door rubs. Religion, so often the bully's ally, sidestepped that temptation by widening its porch. Augurs with plebeian accents, pontiffs who kept calendars so courts did not step on feasts, fetials who wrapped anger in words so the city would remember itself later. The calendar became a public wall, not a priest's private toy. The nundine became a marketplace heartbeat. The fasti taught citizens to make plans without asking a powerful man's mood. Markets were tidied by aediles who preferred chalk to speeches, posted names for praise and blame, and made queues out of fear on grain days. Censors counted and then cleansed, set roads like poems and water like promises, and carved names where wheels could polish them. Courts tamed anger into sum and schedule, gave Ulysses rules and respect, and taught citizens to settle without becoming enemies. Households received methods, marriages in several keys, dowries as trust not plunder, guardians who owe accounts, wills that steer property without cheating the dead, manumission that turns collars into names. Land was saved from swallowing the poor by a number, 500 eugera, that never fully held and never fully let go, a sermon with teeth that made cheats clench before biting. Debt was removed from the public theater and given a desk, where tapping a stylus on wax at the right date became a more satisfying sound than a rope jerked in a square. Allies were turned from conquered into counted, some with vote, some without, many with treaties, and soldiers learned to camp like cities, while cities learned to pave like camps. What did it buy? Not heaven. Reliability. The kind of morning where a mother can tell a child that today will look like yesterday in the best ways. The kind of afternoon where mills rest because a line says they will. The kind of evening where a man carries a jar from a spout that a censor's contract keeps clear and feels the unshowy love of a government that worked. The kind of night where judges sleep because their names mean proportion, not favor. The kind of name that endures not because an ancestor once shouted on a battlefield, but because a bridge stood in a flood. The struggle of the orders is often described as a war. Keep the word if you like, but hear it properly. It was a war against forgetting. Each measure, the Valerio-Horatian stitches, the Canuleian door, the Licinian sextian bundle, the Ogulnian widening, the Publilian smoothing, the Poetelian mercy, the Genusian spacing, the Ovinian curation, the Hortensian binding, was not a weapon that destroyed. It was a tool that remembered. Each one said in its own tone, "We are safer when we can point." The city you have walked is not soft. It is gentled by forms. A tribune still has a palm. He uses a pen more. A consul still has lictors. He watches their bundles become ceremony rather than threat. A censor still carries a mark. He uses it with an economy that makes it heavier. An aedile still fines. He prefers to post thanks because praise multiplies. A praetor still invents. He pretends he is conserving. A judge still decides. He imitates a neighbor more than a god. It is an ethic disguised as paperwork. We end, as we promised, by water. The island sits like a thoughtful thumb in the river's palm. The quays breathe, the mooring rings shine where rope bit all day. A bald man laughs too loudly because he sold all his onions. A tired child leans his head against a jar and dreams something he will forget before breakfast. Lamps paint long tremors across the surface and then pull them back as the wind turns. You can name it plainly, and you should. The river Tiber moves slowly tonight. The line is a lullaby because it is a fact, and the fact is a gift because it is reliable. It begins with absence. Not a riot, not a fire, just hands that don't show up. The levy is called, and the men who usually answer by instinct stand still. Wives watch them not move. Children, expert readers of their parents' faces, sense a rule has changed. A few elders mutter that the world is ending. It isn't. It's the way repairs begin, with the quiet that comes before tools. The story is set in the 5th century BCE, when debt and levy braided themselves into a knot that cut. Years of campaigning had pulled men from fields at the wrong weeks. Interest, counted in a way that grew like mold, had turned temporary shortage into permanent shame. In the market, Nexum, the binding of a free body for private debt, stood like a stage. It taught spectators all the wrong lessons, that the law liked theater, that the city could be distracted, that poverty had a costume. If you want citizens to keep faith, don't make them rehearse despair in public. So they left, not to burn things, but to refuse to be scenery. The working people walked out together to a ridge, the sacred mount, a place of scrub, wind, and the kind of silence that carries longer than shouting. Fires burned evenly. Children slept under carts. Women took inventory with the calm of professionals. Men looked at the sky, which offered neither omen nor excuse. They were gone long enough for the city to taste the flavor of their absence. Markets thin, drains fill, orders echo in empty rooms. Rome is powerful because it is busy. Remove the busyness and you discover how fragile power is. Council split in the Senate. Some wanted rods, others, remembering there were no backs to meet them, proposed words. Into that space stepped Menenius Agrippa, not with a sword but with a story. You know it, the belly and the limbs. The limbs, tired of feeding the belly that seems to do nothing, strike. Quickly they learn that the belly's quiet work is not cheating, it is distribution. No limb is noble if it forgets where strength comes from. It's a parable with dust on it, but dust suits Rome, and stories work best when they sound like kitchens. The walk back did not feel like surrender. It felt like a treaty with themselves. They returned with 2 new institutions tucked under their cloaks, the tribunate, born sacrosanct by the people's vow, and the plebeian aedileship, tasked with keeping the people's records, and in time, their markets and granaries. Sacrosanctity is not magic, it is a social technology. The many agree to become a wall. Any hand laid on a tribune is an insult to all. That vow does not make tribunes angels, it makes them useful. The men chosen as the first tribunes stand in the square in plain cloaks and learn to hold themselves like doorposts, motionless until a hinge groans. They practice saying, "Stop," in voices that don't compete with drumbeats. They practice stepping into arguments without becoming the argument. They practice something harder still, listening to small requests and hearing systems behind them. When a woman complains that a mill rumbles through the baby's nap, the tribune hears time, peace, work, childhood, and sleep, and he writes a line that turns all 5 into hours. The plebeian aediles begin as record keepers for the plebs, guardians of the people's resolutions and temple of Ceres, Liber, and Libera on the Aventine, and become, because Rome likes to turn useful habits into offices, the city's market magistrates. They invent rituals of trust, the weight on a peg, the posted name, the fine that is heavy enough to be remembered and light enough to be paid. The Aventine itself becomes a neighborhood with a personality. Plain gods, plain bread, strong wine, a festival you can attend without borrowing a toga. If the Capitoline is where Rome brags to strangers, the Aventine is where it keeps its promises. All of this would have been a drama if it had stayed exceptional. It didn't. It hardened into procedure. The tribune's palm is no longer a miracle. It is a pause everyone has practiced. The aedile's chalk is not a threat. It is a promise of consistency. Men who never expected to like law learn to lean on it. Wives whose calendars used to be weather and prayer find that fasty on a wall, the open and closed days, the market cycle, let them plan sausages and weddings. Children learn, from the way grown-ups behave, that shouting is a tool, not a diet. At night, on the mount that will always remember the night it taught Rome to listen, the breeze has the dry sweetness of crushed time. Down below, the river Tiber makes its slow loops past the island. If you say the river Tiber moves slowly tonight, men who were there will nod with a gentleness you won't see in them often. They will not say, We invented a country out of a pause. They will say, we went for a walk and came home with work. The morning after the return, a creditor reaches for a sleeve in the cattle market and a tribune says, stop. A schedule is written. The man who owed is still in debt. He is not in despair. Rome discovers that mercy does not have to feel heroic to be heroic. And so the machine begins to hum. The people create a shield and a memory. The elders keep a purse and a calendar. The river keeps time. This is not an end to struggle. It is the invention of a grammar for it. The hunger for certainty, not victory, drove Rome to carve law into wood and bronze. After the first secession, another pressure rose. Patrician monopoly on Rome, the custom of the ancestors, felt to many like a market where prices weren't posted. Give us rules, said the plebs, not to throw at faces, but to point at when faces lie. The answer was radical, and for a time reckless. Suspend ordinary magistracies and entrust lawmaking to 10 men, decemviri, for a fixed term, to write the law down. The first board did well. They traveled, read Greeks, gathered customs older than insults, and etched 10 tables that sounded like Rome looks, practical, dense, without adjectives. Procedure is center stage. Summons, witness, delay, sureties, a choreography to keep lawsuits from becoming knife fights. Property rules are skeletal and fair, emancipatio for land, slaves, beasts of drought. In jure cessio for a staged surrender of a thing before a magistrate when edges blur. Usucapio for possession ripened by time and good faith. Neighbors are reconciled by servitudes, water drawing across another's soil by pail and path, way for feet, not wheels, eaves that keep rain where it fell, trees you must prune where they shade my patch too much. Delicts, wrongs are priced so heat turns to coins. Furtum, theft, is penalized in multiples. Damnum, damage, is paid according to value. Injuria, insult, is recognized as harm even when skin is unbroken. Family law is stern. Patria potestas is recorded, not invented. Fathers wield power, moderated by custom and soon enough shame. Funerals are trimmed to size, no gold save for teeth, no cutting of cheeks, no burial inside the sacred line. The city will not compete in grief. Grief is competition's enemy. And then, success's common parasite, power lingered. A second board took longer than it had been granted, and thought of itself not as scribes, but as rulers. The tables they added, 2 more, were fine. Their behavior wasn't. Their leader's name, Appius Claudius, will appear later on better terms. This earlier namesake, tradition loves to stack names like amphora, turned charisma into entitlement. Courts bent toward him. Rods learned his rhythm. The city learned in pain. The story that carries the pain is Virginia, a girl, a father, a centurion, Virginius, and a decemvir who wanted what law should deny him. Appius tried to manufacture a claim of servitude against her, a legal trick performed in the open because tricks degrade best in full sun. Her father, summoned from camp, saw that the court had been turned into a stage for a man's appetite. He asked to hold his daughter. He killed her to keep her free. The square inhaled horror, the decemvir inhaled fear. The people who had learned how to use silence as a tool once already used it again, Aventine first, then out beyond the sacred line. Not one city, 2, one that loved form, one that loved a man. The first returned, the second resigned. When the decemvirate fell, Rome did what Rome does at her best. She kept the good work and threw away the men who had spoiled it. The 12 tables stayed. The engineers of their fall, Valerius and Horatius, stitched wounds with 3 threads, 449 BCE. Appeal, provocation made explicit again, tribunes and their acts wrapped in sacrosanctity that did not depend on a magistrate's courtesy. The Senate's advice made public property of memory. Drama ended, practice resumed. The tables did what they were meant to. They taught. Children learned to speak the law as if reciting counting songs. Si in ius vocat ito. If someone summons you to court, go. Women quoted the funeral rules to enthusiastic cousins. Men who ended their day with wine learned to love words more than glances. Even when life moved beyond the table's carpentry, the sound of them kept judges honest. Short clauses, no weather in them, just weights. You can walk the city today and see the table's shadow in ordinary things. The boundary stone touched like a little god, the hook over the meat stall at regulation height, the weight that rings true when you tap it, the ditch that drains because it has a number, not because someone is in a good mood. It is architecture without columns. At night, The law boards themselves. New copies of old shapes gleam where lamp smoke polished them. Boys trace letters they cannot yet read. Girls practice saying, "I stipulate," with a straight voice. Down by the quay, the river Tiber folds light into itself, as if eating a line of poetry it plans to repeat in the morning. You can say it out loud without anyone rolling their eyes. The river Tiber moves slowly tonight, and the law, finally set where the slow can study it, moves with it. The Aventine is Rome's plebeian porch, olives, grain, and gods who prefer bread to marble. When the second decemviral board went bad, that ridge became a gesture again. The people left their rooms and occupied their own hill, as if mapping their patience on the earth. Soldiers in a camp near Crustumerium, Virginius's men, marched back with a logic simple enough to teach children. If the city is not a city, the army is not an army. A state is not rods and titles. It is consent arranged into habits. What did they want? Not the past. The past had kings in it, and kings had boys in them the way storms have hail. They wanted what they had almost had. Magistrates who listen, lists that live, rules posted and kept. The Senate met, measured the emptiness, and did arithmetic. It chose survival over pride. Valerius and Horatius, names that arrive in Roman crises like calming tea, proposed a packet, 449 BCE. First, provocation is not a grace, it is a right. From magistrate to people in capital cases, a path that must stay open no matter who blocks the street. Second, the tribunes, and by extension the plebeian aediles and decisions of the plebs, are to be sacrosanct and valid, not by sufferance of patricians, but by the people's vow binding on all. Third, the Senate's counsel is to be recorded and kept, not whispered and denied. Each item is a doorstop that keeps official doors from slamming. The Aventine emptied the way a swell recedes, not with panic, but with weight. Men return to rooms both relieved and sobered, as people are after an operation that saved a life and left a scar. Markets reopened with a new sound. The clink of weights against pegs had authority. Tribunes found themselves busier in quiet ways, drafting bills, scheduling hearings, sending runners with slates, than in loud ways. The aediles widened their brief, turning their care of plebeian records into municipal hygiene. The distinction between plebeian and curule aediles would sharpen in time. For now, the city noticed that a clean drain and an honest scale are poetry in prose. The Aventine kept the memory. The temple of Ceres, Liber, Libera, grain, wine, and liberty is a syllabus carved onto a hill. Plebeian archives live there, plebeian festivals gather there, plebeian politics learn to sound like management there. On feast days the hill smells of bread and garlands, on work days of ink and wax. A child brought there for the first time will say, "Are we allowed?" And a mother will say, "Of course," and that half sentence will do more to establish dignity than 20 boasted victories. The right of appeal, provocation, grew a ritual. A condemned man or his friend calls out, a tribune raises a palm, rods stop, the square changes rooms. Sometimes mercy, sometimes confirmation, always the relief of everyone watching. It made magistrates careful in advance because no one enjoys being corrected in public. It made citizens prouder because they saw their collective decency in use. If you want to know whether a state is free, don't ask about speeches. Ask whether rods can be paused. One more thing changed and seems small until you need it. Writing became a habit, not a flourish. The posting of Senatus Consulta, the keeping of plebiscites, the proliferation of copies of the 12 tables all taught Rome to prefer paper to memory, not because paper is more elegant, but because it is more democratic. A rule you can touch is a rule you can argue about without permission. In the evening, when men like the smell of their own sweat less than they did in the afternoon, the city's edges reknit. The Aventine sends families home. The Forum accepts them like a river accepting tributaries. The island in the Tiber splits the current and returns it smoother. If you say, "The river Tiber moves slowly tonight," you are not indulging yourself. You are telling the truth a city longs to hear after it has survived a temptation to be stupid. Lawmaking can be an operation or a season. The Licinian Sextian reforms were a decade, 376 to 367 BCE, of refusal, revision, and reframing. Picture two tribunes, Gaius Licinius Stolo and Lucius Sextius Lateranus, coming to work each year with the same 3 lines and facing vetoes, auguries, and procedural fences designed to teach persistence despair. They did not learn despair, they learned pacing. First chord, debt arithmetic. A city that taxes courage in late spring and then charges interest on courage's absence in late summer is a city that eats itself. Licinius and Sextius wrote a rule simple enough to fit in the mouth. Interest already paid counts toward principal. Schedules are legal. It turned the creditor's pleasure from humiliation to punctuality and the debtor's fear from public rope to posted dates. It did not erase debt, it made paying possible. Second chord, the public land, ager publicus, limit, 500 eugera per person, with a cap on pasture and rules about how many freeborn laborers must work a plot. It was a sermon with a number. Cunning men tried names on cousins, shepherd counts that lied, fences that drifted. Censors tugged back with notes, lease refusals, and a skill Rome honed to a clean edge, public embarrassment. The line did not create paradise. It created hesitation, which is a kind of civic grace. Third chord, the top bench. Rome's paired chairs, the consuls, had been largely a patrician monopoly, with interludes of military tribunes crowding the stage so that plebeians could lead without touching the name. Licinius and Sextius wrote what everyone already knew was efficient. Of the two, one may be plebeian every year. It didn't abolish patricians. It abolished the excuse that birth was necessary for competence. Opposition came as veto, religious delay, counterbills, and the polite version of threat. You will unbalance the world. The tribunes reproposed, split, braided, and learned to move their measures through the concilium plebis with a rhythm that wouldn't trip on the centuries. They refused to break the Constitution to save it. That refusal made them conservatives of the clever kind. They preserved the shape, paired power, short terms, public voice, by making it true for more people. When the bundle finally passed in 367 BCE, the sensation was not euphoria, but settling. Men noted the change on boards and in little books kept by wives who understood the value of columns. And then Rome did what it does when it wins a fight worth having. It acted as if the new normal had always been normal. The first plebeian consul, Lucius Sextius Lateranus, sat and the earth did not tilt. A praetor stood beside him to mind law, while consuls minded spears. The city looked a shade more like the men who carried it. Licinius's own name did not escape the very limit he wrote. Later stories, more moral than archival, say he was fined for overholding land beyond the cap he had urged. Whether or not the anecdote is precise, the spirit is Roman. Even authors of rules must stoop to measure. In a city that carves names on stones for bridges and drains, fairness is a road you can walk, not a speech you can clap. The debt rule, interest to principal, schedules, arrived in rooms like a cool jug. A creditor learned to love dates more than scenes. A debtor learned to keep dates more than excuses. The limit on land turned arguments into arithmetic. The consul rule softened conversations at doors that once closed early. Fathers told sons they could train for oratory and arms with equal hope, and told daughters they could expect their dowries to be treated like trust, not loot. In the market, weights kept hanging on pegs. In the forum, edicts kept being posted. At the river, barges kept nosing in. A great reform, to succeed in Rome, must melt into routine. The Licinian Sextian bundle did. It taught everyone to love maintenance. At night, the men who had spent 10 years learning to braid 3 chords walked home without escort. The river Tiber made its calm statement around the island. You could say, the river Tiber moves slowly tonight, and imagine that the water had been watching the decade with the same instruction it always gives Rome. Go on, do not rush. Between big bangs like 367 and 287 lie tuning years, where a law removes a stone from the shoe of a process so you can walk all day without a blister. One such year is 339 BCE, when Q. Publius Philo, a man who loved logistics, carried a set of Publian laws that didn't shout. They aligned practice with sense. First tune, Patrum Auctoritas, the elder's authority, had hung over legislation like a fog. In older days, it could veto what the people passed by simply refusing to ratify. The Publian adjustment moved that assent before the vote, obliging the Senate to clear the lane in advance. After that, yes meant yes the first time. Laws stopped taking victory laps to earn permission they didn't need. Second tune, bills in the comitia tributa, citizens by tribes, were to come from magistrates, not private ambition, and the plebeian tribunes gained firmer footing, bringing measures that bit. The effect was to gather energy toward the assemblies that worked without making the others superfluous. Think of it as moving furniture, so sunlight falls where the family actually sits. Third tune. Elections for censors now by tribes, not centuries, spreading the choice a little more evenly and reminding everyone that the men who count all citizens should be chosen by a map that resembles neighborhoods, not a weapon rack. It's a detail you feel in 5 years when a list is fairer than it might have been. Publilius himself earned an odd laurel. He was allowed to hold the praetorship even while commanding in the field, the first of a long Roman habit of letting competence ignore a boundary when a task demands it. He is not a statue man, he is a signpost, pointing where a process must go to keep faith with itself. The result of these tunes, sprinkled among reforms louder in schoolbooks, is a smoother city. Tribunes spend less time prying decisions through narrow doors. Censors elected by a broader voice take their moral pencil to markets and bridges with a steadier hand, and plebiscites stop being petitions and become policy. All this makes for fewer stories and more sleep. In the Forum, you can see the difference in the way scribes stand. Before, they hovered near the Senate's door, waiting for ratification that might not come. After, they stand at the posting board, ready to nail fresh law to wood, where even men with dust in their eyebrows can read. Filers file, carriers carry, notaries copy. A city is never more alive than when its boring people are busiest. At the 12 tables, a boy stumbles over auctoritas and asks his mother what it means. She says, not command, consent lent by weight, like a good neighbor's yes. The boy nods and thinks of the man who fixes carts at the lane's bend, whose yes is worth more than his father's speech. He understands law a little the way an adult does, as a texture. Down by the water, barges come on time 2 days in a row, and a wine seller claims he's lucky. He isn't. He is administered. The island turns the current with its familiar shrug. It is late enough that you can say, the river Tiber moves slowly tonight, and the man beside you will answer, good, we needed that. Not all Appii are cautionary tales. A century after the decemviral scandal, another Appius Claudius, Secus the blind, left fingerprints so clean you can still feel them in your feet. As censor in 312 BCE, he pushed Rome's taste for infrastructure from appetite to ethic. His 2 great acts are famous: the Via Appia, a road that behaves like a sentence, short, declarative, connecting Rome to Capua and with later extensions toward Brundisium, and the Aqua Appia, a covered aqueduct that hums under stone and ends in light where women fill jars. The road's method is its meaning. It sits on a layered bed, stamen, rudis, nucleus, summa crusta, and rises to a crown that sheds water like a well-shaped back. It runs straight where straightness makes sense and bends only where the land commands it to. It measures itself by milestones so men can count their homes back into their hands. It teaches a dozen lessons that law should also teach: depth before finish, drainage before speed, maintenance before monument. The Aqua Appia is bolder because it is quieter. Its power is secrecy, covered against theft, sun, and filth, graded to fall just enough, lined to resist the world's hunger. It delivers certainty into rooms that used to depend weather and favor. Health is a political emotion. A mother whose child coughs less will forgive many things. A city that gives that mercy on schedule earns a loyalty wider than victory. Appius was no mere engineer. He enrolled freedmen and poorer citizens into tribes more boldly than custom liked, arguing with the kind of practical justice Rome remembers kindly. Men who pay and fight should be counted where counting matters. Later censors tried to undo his roles. Nobody unlaid his stones or unplugged his water. Inclusion, once experienced, is a road that feels natural underfoot. Exclusion, once reimposed, feels like gravel in a shoe. He had a tongue as well. Tradition says an old, blind Appius Claudius argued against peace with Pyrrhus decades later, his words walking straighter than his steps. Whether the speech is embroidered or not, the style is true. Rome is learning oratory as public engineering, phrases that set curbs and crowns in mind so thought drains where it should. The legal Latin that grows in this soil will be the empire's best export. Under Appius's shadow, aediles grew prouder, censors stricter, praetors clearer. Men who once wanted statues learned to want stones placed where the weak walk. The Via Appia became a school. Every step taught something that could be used in law: line, layer, drain, measure, post. The Aqua Appia taught maintenance as piety. Anyone can build, not everyone can keep. At sunset, the road holds heat like a memory. The water keeps cool like a vow. The river Tiber does its usual patient labor, and you are permitted to sound sentimental because the evidence is under your sandals. The river Tiber moves slowly tonight, and Rome has learned to prefer slow to sudden when building what must last. The gods can be misused as locks. Rome learned to make them keys. In 300 BCE, the Lex Ogulnia opened the colleges of augurs and pontiffs to plebeians. The sky did not change, the city did. When men from more streets read signs, omens stopped smelling like strategy and started smelling like weather. A closed day felt like prudence, not privilege. An open day felt earned, not stolen. Augurs stand on hills early, draw a templum in the air with their crooked staff, and watch birds cross the frame. They are literate in silence, knowing when the absence of a sign is the sign. They report, they don't command. Pontiffs keep calendars and write straight, which words on which steps, which cakes, which cattle, and, most importantly, which days are open for votes and trial. Religion does not rule, it structures. The Fetials, priests of frontiers, do their old brilliant trick. Even war must be spoken, a border touched, a spear thrown with a sentence attached. If later we are tempted to brag about Roman law, remember the priests taught us that form can tame fury. Calendars moved from minds to walls. The fasti hung where anyone could see. Open days fasti, closed days nefasti, half open for administration, market days with their 8-day nundine rhythm. Tribunes began dating their bills with by the third market day, or within 10 days after harvest, and the praetor's edict picked up that music. Time, which you cannot own, became shareable. A baker altered his mix day, a tanner moved his soak, a midwife arranged to be near on a day when men won't be voting. Freedom feels like space, order feels like time. Combine them, and you get reliability. Festivals learned proportion. The ludi plebe games associated with the plebs, and often stewarded by plebeian aediles, grew into civic glue. Racing, theater, ritual, and that underrated pioneer of peace, seating. Who sits where and knows it in advance is the difference between pride and a fight. The ludi romani likewise drew lines that felt festive rather than carceral. A people that knows its place because it chose it behaves differently from a people that feels placed. On the Aventine, the temple of Ceres, Liber, and Libera appointed anniversaries by which memory kept polite. The day the people left, the day they returned, the day the law boards went up again after enemies thought to melt them, the day a bridge took the flood and did not give. Ritual is the calendar's poetry. It reminds the body what the mind forgets when hungry. When a day is closed by birds, men go home. They don't mutter conspiracy, they mutter supper. A city that has learned to pause without blaming someone has learned a high form of trust. Rome doesn't often look tender. She does here. At dusk, as if to display the lesson, the river Tiber takes the calendar's light as it comes. Gold, then gray, then a modest dark in which only posts and rings shine. You can be factual and musical at once. The river Tiber moves slowly tonight, and tomorrow's square will open in time. The 12 tables are a mirror people carry without knowing it. You see your face in them when you fight about water, shade, noise, and the price of someone else's mistake. They are not a code the way later ages use the word. They are grammar, how to speak fairness without getting poetic. Take delicts, private wrongs. Furtum is not simply stealing, it is meddling for gain. The tables distinguish manifest, caught in the act, from non-manifest, and Roman habit, refined by the praetor, often turns what could be vengeance into money, not out of softness, because money is measurable and can be posted. In Iuria, injury is both body and dignity. To slap a free man in public or to follow a market woman with filth in your mouth is to owe her something. Damnum, damage, presents a child's question with an adult's answer. If your goat eats my greens, how much of my evening do I lose? The Lex Aquilia later adds spine to the answer. But the tables already expect proportion. Servitudes are friendship drafted into clauses. The right of way on foot where carts would break a field. The right to draw water with a pail at certain hours. The right to light in a narrow court. The duty to prune where a tree's zeal becomes theft. The praetor turns these into formulae so the iudex can carry facts to a place where resentment runs out of oxygen. Funerals, which cities mismanage when they are vain, are clipped to size by law that is also tasty. No gold beyond teeth. No wailing for hire to intimidate the living with grief's volume. Burials beyond the pomerium, the sacred boundary. The dead take the road, where names prick travelers to thought without shaming the poor. The living return to rooms that smell of bread and oil, not smoke and show. Property moves by emancipation, bronze, scales, witnesses, because people lie less when they hold weights. The form looks silly when a man sells a jar to a friend to accomplish a will, but the silliness holds truth fast. A public ceremony makes private wishes harder to ruin. In ire sesio, a staged lawsuit before a magistrate serves when edges blur. Is this mine? We agree it is. Then let the magistrate award. Eusecipio, ripening by possession, saves the world from permanent confusion by turning long peace into title, provided the start was clean. A boy will learn the time periods by singing them. A girl will exercise her own competence by running a house as a legal person. The table's tone is the republic's tone even when doctrine has moved on. Short, exact, repeatable. Their style is a teacher rude enough to be loved. If you summon him, let him go. If he does not go, let him be brought. If he is sick, let a cart be given. No respectfully submit here, just verbs. In practice, the praetor's edict rubs alongside the tables like a new shoe breaking in. Where the tables say cut, the edict offers unless. Where the tables say pay double, the edict says unless he mended at once. Rome's genius is not to worship the old or the new, but to let them sand each other. Neighborliness in this system is not a virtue alone. It is enforced by small public numbers. An eave must end here, a ditch must be this deep, a cart rim must be this wide in lanes, a mill must stop then. People behave because cords and pegs and posted boards turn arguing into checking. Law is the friend of the shy and the enemy of the loud. Even the household god, the lar by the door, is a jurist. Keys hang near him, receipts pile on a shelf under him, children touch the lintel where nundinae are marked. He presides over columns that say oil in, oil out, debts owed, debts paid. He is religion in Rome's second, truer sense, habit that keeps promises. Beside him, a lamp leans on its side to save oil, and a mother reads tomorrow's fasti like the weather. Down in the long bend of the Tiber, barges slide belly heavy, ropes squeal on rings, and the island makes its patient edits to the current. If you say, the river Tiber moves slowly tonight, you are not changing the subject. You are naming the mood in which all this works. The salutatio, the morning call, is a picture often drawn as a staircase, a patron at the top, clients ascending with hopes and petitions. Rome's repairs turned that staircase into a ramp with landings. The patronus still greets lines of people, a baker who lent his carts in a flood, a freedman whose knowledge of dockhands by nickname is worth 3 laws, a soldier whose calm in crowds spreads like oil in a pan. But what the patron gives has changed. He no longer promises to bend a judge. He offers letters, introductions, copies of clauses, and most valuable, instructions on which office to visit, which peg to check, which aedile to quote. Clients grow on this ramp. A man who once relied on muscle in the patron's shoulder learns to rely on paper and habit. A patron who once loved applause learns to love the quiet thanks given in a market when a bridge he paid for stood. Amicitia, friendship, remains the lubricant of politics, but it is less greasy. Letters are short, notarized, favors are within form, men part without debt. The Hades of Concord, the Temple of Concord, sits above this traffic like a satisfied idea. Concord here is not agreement, it is arrangement. People disagree as much as ever, they do it over numbers. The patron points to weights on a hook, not to his own chest. The client points to a posted name on a board, not to his cousin with a loud voice. The old exchange, obedience for protection, becomes cooperation for procedure. Women, who always did more of the real work than statues admit, thrive in the ramp version. A matron walks into the forum with a notary and speaks to an aedile without flinch, because being a client now means knowing rules. She quotes a clause about cart widths and watches a seller swallow his favorite excuse. A boy trailing her learns 2 things he will never unlearn. Law can be spoken by anyone who memorizes it, and memory is not magic, it is posted. Freedmen, liberti, turn the ramp into an escalator. Their children become freeborn, their names grow longer, their letters lose apologies. A freedman who once bent his spine in salutation now bends over his own ledger and is greeted by younger men who ask for advice. The city's social map does not flatten, it complicates. which is the polite word for opening. There is still ambition, electoral swagger, and bribery's coy cousin. There are still dinners bought and games funded to make votes friendly. Aediles' spectacles glitter and sometimes become stepping stones to higher office. The censors scowl at excess and mark names when generosity smells like investment rather than piety. But because Lex Hortensia and friends have posted the route from want to rule, the path of corruption is narrower and embarrassing. You cannot quietly invent a law in a whisper. You have to write it, post it, and wait 3 market cycles while people poke it. In this society, the greeting itself changes shade. Clients still gather at dawn, but they stand like men waiting for a shop to open, not like men waiting for a god to smile. The patron emerges with a list, not a scepter. Marcus to the aedile, Tullia to the quaestor, Gaius, take this clause to the praetor's bench. If the augur closes the sky, wait. The queue disperses into tasks. The city is the new patron, and the law boards are its vestibule. Uphill at the Temple of Concord, a priest sweeps early and thinks his work trivial until he looks down at the square and sees how much less shouting there is when the steps are clean. He thanks the gods for brooms.